You're not getting any younger, so
I will support.
Hey you! Yes, you! Welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Today's episode is brought to you by Jen and Juice Coaching by yours truly. For the past 5 years, I've worked with over 100 people to help them feel, well, less stuck. Whether you're looking to change careers, start a side hustle, or just get a strategy for your life, head on over to jenglantz.com/coaching and you can find out about my 1-hour coaching specials that will help you feel like you can finally cross those things off your to-do list and start whatever kind of project, life change, or dream that you have. Hey, any youngers, it's me, your host, Jen Glantz, back with another episode of the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, saying a gigantic what's up to you, wishing you as well as you can be right now in this early time of January. I know that a lot of us are feeling many different things, and we're looking at the future of this year in many different ways. But one of the things that starts to happen as the rose-colored glasses of a new year start to be shattered and we look at our to-do list, we look at our calendar, we start to think about the what-ifs, is we start to feel a ton of self-doubt. I was talking to a friend the other day who doubted her ability to even want to fight on for this year, to fight for the things that she even wants to do because she's feeling so much self-doubt. On the other hand, there's people who have all these big goals, all these big plans, and they're the ones that are facing the doubters, the people who are trying to tell them, hey, don't do that, or hey, you're not going to be able to do that this year, or saying a lot of things to cloud their mind and cloud their judgment with all of these thoughts and all of these feelings that just push them down when they shouldn't have to feel that way. I brought on a really awesome guest this week who addresses both of those things, the moments of self-doubt and the doubters, the feeling of imposter syndrome and that feeling of just wanting to start something for yourself when nothing else in your life feels quite right. Kara Goldin is this week's guest, and she is the founder and CEO of Hint, best known for its award-winning Hint water, the leading unsweetened flavored water brand out there. Kara's received many awards over the years, and she was previously the Vice President of Shopping Partnerships at America Online, also known as AOL. I know some of you still have your AOL email accounts out there, won't name names, but we all know AOL and, of course, AIM. Her first book, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, was recently released and is now a Wall Street Journal and Amazon bestseller. Kara and I had a pretty deep and honest conversation about some of the stories in her book that were her personal life stories of moments in her career when people tried to stop her or she thought about even stopping herself. I reached out to Kara after I read an article about a story from her book, story from her life in Fortune magazine. It was a story of how she always knew she wanted to work at Fortune magazine. And she wanted to work there so badly that she applied to work there and received a rejection letter that basically said to her, hey, if you ever find yourself in New York, let us know. And she took that as a come to New York for a job interview. So she got on a plane, went to New York, went into the office, and they looked at her stunned. She handed them the letter and basically was like, I'm here for an interview. And they had never seen anything like that before. And Kara's one of those people who, she doesn't play by the general playbook in life. she's been told by many people, you need an MBA to rise up in your career, or you need this or that. And she's done things her own way, her Kara way, in a sense. And I love that about her. And there's so many quotes in the book that you just want to highlight. One of them was about how you should create your own opportunities, which is something I really feel for in a year like 2021. With so much unknown, with so many things we can't plan, it's one of those times in our lives when we need to take control of what we can control and give ourselves opportunities when the world or our career or the people in our lives simply can't. I am so excited for you to listen to this episode with our guest of the month, Kara Goldin. And as always, if you like the show, which I hope that you do, please, please, please leave us a review on iTunes. Just scroll down on your phone, click the 5 stars, write us the review. It means the world. It helps me continue to bring on incredible guests like Kara. And come hang out with us in the Secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group. There are over 1,500 incredible humans in that group waiting and willing and excited to welcome you to the community and talk about the things that are on your mind that you might not have anyone else to talk to. Hope to see you there. Enjoy the show. All my love, Jen Glantz. I want to just jump right in with you because I have so many things to ask you. And it was interesting because when I was reading the book, every chapter felt like a brand new theme. It almost felt like there was a lesson learned within every single chapter. But one of the ones that I kept carrying with me was that sometimes your life doesn't go as planned. And sometimes when it doesn't go as planned, you have to show up and fight for those ideas. So I want to talk about you specifically, because one of the things that really struck me as being interesting, you never planned to be an entrepreneur. You didn't necessarily ever think you would start a business, and you almost became this accidental entrepreneur. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that term, that phrase, and how you almost fell into starting your own business.
Yeah. And it's a funny thing because I think when you're in it, right, you don't really even, I can't even tell you that when I was writing the book that I intended to really talk about it in that way. But I think for me, it was really, it was kind of looking back over time and how I got here. I've met so many people along the way who have, particularly guys, but who have moved to Silicon Valley because they want to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to become an entrepreneur because I saw that I had this idea to solve a problem for consumers, starting with me first. And I think that the training that I got in tech before actually starting, my beverage company was invaluable. Again, when I was in it, I didn't know. It was just sort of a different mindset. And as you know from reading the book, I mean, it really started for me in the mid-90s when I showed up and I had admired Steve Jobs. And I mean, I don't think there were very many women around me who sort of knew what Steve Jobs, like who he was. Like they kind of knew who he was. He was some crazy tech guy, but I was like, oh no, he makes pretty products that have little apples on them and they're simple and they're so way better than like an IBM mainframe computer. It's like, they're just easier and they're better. And so I think that for me, when I showed up in Silicon Valley, that was something that I thought, okay, new start, I'm leaving New York, I come here. But then the other big piece of it was that there were 5 guys who had actually worked for Steve, who I stumbled upon, who were doing this startup that was a spin out of Apple. And I remember walking in that first day for like an informational interview, and they're all in jeans and t-shirts and there's old pizza boxes, and it wasn't in their garage, but it was pretty damn close. It was in San Mateo in this like little office and pretty scrappy. They didn't have desks, it was just like they were sitting on the floor. I mean, it was super, like I'd never seen anything like it. I had come from Time and CNN where it was just much more buttoned up. And yet I really enjoyed myself because I felt like this whole concept of ideas came from anywhere. And that there were people who had MBAs from Stanford. Another one had, his from Berkeley. And then there were people who didn't even have a college degree. And it didn't matter because they were all coming up with ideas. And I thought, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And so that our company got acquired by America Online, and then, it was a little more buttoned up and got more and more buttoned up as time went on. I always kind of miss those early days of being able to say, I have no idea what I'm doing, but this is really fun. And some days, you're sitting there at the office until 11 o'clock at night eating, pizza, not old pizza. You're actually ordering a new pizza, but you're really trying to figure out a problem. And it's kind of like, you know, I don't know, playing a game of, what's that old board game, Risk or Monopoly, where you're just trying to figure out what's the best move. And some days you just have to say, you know what, I'm tired, I'm going to go home and keep thinking on this, but you still get excited to think. And so that kind of mindset, I had no idea. That's what I was leaving AOL with, and always really curious, always really focusing on what can we do, instead of, looking at what was available, and looking at sort of everybody else around me, but also saying, well, okay, well, that's pretty cool. Even if they're a competitor, that's pretty awesome. But what can we ultimately do? And that was probably the biggest thing that I look back on, that I was trained to be an entrepreneur in many ways, but until I actually had an idea, had a problem that I was solving around my own personal health, I never really thought that I would become one.
There's a line in the book that stuck with me because it's been a mantra of mine for many years. And I hope that it's a mantra for people when they read the book and they view their own life. And the line is about opportunities. If they don't come to you, create them. And that's something that I took from you throughout the book and throughout your career history. Of people were always trying to tell you, you know what, Kara, you need an MBA for this job, you need a this for this job, and you were like, no, it doesn't feel right, it's not what I want. And a lot of people plan their lives out in chunks, in years, in 5-year chunks, in 10-year chunks. I didn't get the impression that you did that, right? So
No.
there's people out there right now who feel lost, who their 5-year plan completely fell apart in 2020. What advice would you have for them based on you and your story?
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back in history too, I think I grew up in sort of a different house where I was the last of 5 kids. My parents were 40 when they had me. And so I had the oldest parents on the block. And, and my brothers, I had 2 sisters and 2 brothers. My brothers were really naughty. If they're listening, they were like, well, we weren't that bad, but my parents were tired. By the time they got to me, they were like, look, just be home on time and don't do anything to embarrass us. And obviously don't get hurt, but those were sort of like, that was it. Those were the marching orders. And then one other thing that my dad said, everyone in this house has to play sports. And so I learned so many things around that. Like, I did a lot of gymnastics. I was a runner, and I did soccer and softball and lots of these other things. But the thing that I really, really learned from being an athlete is that there were some things that I was good at, and there were some things that I wasn't good at, but I showed up and I learned, and I watched a lot of people who were better than me. And I think that is such an important thing, that instead of, people talk about imposter syndrome today, I grew up in a place where I just did show up, right? And I knew that if I just sat around long enough, that some of this would sort of wear off on me. But I kind of laughed at myself too, at some of the stuff. And somewhere along the way, like, I made friends, I learned, lots of different things along the way that I think I look back on now and think that they're, super, super valuable. But the other thing that I really learned about that experience, which I think parlays into, answering your question, is that if you don't actually show up and you don't get started, then you won't actually be able to achieve anything, right? And so that is the thing that is so important. And it seems really obvious, right? But yet people don't do it because they fear that they're going to fail. They fear it's too hard. They fear they don't have the right experience. They fear that they don't know enough. And what I've been talking more and more about, even since the launch of my book, is this whole concept of, I'm sharing my story in the book. I don't tell you how to go and be this way. I'm just saying that if you choose to be undaunted, it's hard. It's uncomfortable at first, right? You get things off of your chest. You share what has happened along the way. If you have a wart, you show people, right? Like you don't sit there and try and hide it, if nothing else for your own health, right? And to say that, listen, here I am, and accept me, and I'm also willing to learn lots of things. But at some point, you know you got to accept me for who I am, and if I failed along the way, hopefully I learned a few things. I've also been successful, and count those things. And don't count me out prior to, I'm not going to get out very easily of the game and of the race. And I think that, again, I go back to sort of the sports stories, because I think that they're so important. It's all the same thing, right? And I think that you just have to figure out, are you going to show up? Are you going to compete and make the best of it? And some of those things, I mean, I'll tell you, I went to softball over and over and over again, and I think I was like voted worst player on the team, because I just couldn't do it, right? But whenever that we were picking teams, people wanted me on the team because I made people laugh. Like, and I was like, okay, you guys come and run with me, because I'm pretty fast and I'm a great gymnast. But yeah, softball, I'm really not that great, but I can, I'll bring good cookies to the games or whatever. Again, there's a lot that goes into all of what I'm saying around that I think is really super, super important.
No, I love that. I was also voted worst softball player, so I can completely relate to that. And I kept showing up. I played a year after year after year, even though I was horrible. In the book, my favorite story, I read this story 5 times because I relate to it, I adore it, is the story of you walking into Fortune, a place that you wanted to work at. You got a rejection letter that you didn't quite understand was a rejection letter. You thought it was a come storm into our office letter. And you go to Fortune and you walk in and ask for a job interview on the spot. And it's such an incredible, powerful story. But what I really want to talk about is, in that moment, what's going through your head to make you show up in that courageous way, which you have throughout your career? Because a lot of people in that moment would have that doubt. So how did you move past that, especially in a pivotal moment like that?
Yeah, I just kept sort of telling this story in my head that the editor, the managing editor, Marshall Loeb, had written me this letter. And some people would say, oh, well, was it really his, signature? Was it his assistant? Was it a form letter? I was like, no. It doesn't matter. I'm good with knowing that Marshall sat behind his desk, and when he wasn't editing Fortune magazine, he was writing me this nice letter, because I'm a college student and I was gonna just show up and see what would happen. And as you know, I share the story that it was sort of the tail end of the rest of my journey. I became really good at interviewing. I didn't know how to interview prior to doing this. And this is something I've talked a lot about on college campuses, that none of the people and companies that I wanted to work for actually showed up on my campus. And so I didn't sit there and, cry about it. I instead said, what do I want to do every day? And I just tried to figure out how I could get there. And so I went on a journey, and I bought a plane ticket, and I invested in myself. And that month, I mean, truly, of all of my years, was one of my most favorite months, because I was on my own, and I was walking around cities like Chicago, trying to figure out I was staying with like a friend's parents and stuff, and I knew enough to buy flowers for the people that let me sleep on their couch, basically. But I just learned so much about myself that I didn't even learn in college. And anyway, but by the time I got to Fortune, that's when I just said, I'm here. I might as well just walk in the door and see what happens. And this was before there was security down at the bottom of the building. But I don't know. I think I just thought, what was the worst that could happen? Were they going to throw me out the door? Or if nothing else, I'd go back to my friends at school and I'd say, oh my God, you have to hear this story. It's so funny. And right. Like, I just thought it's either going to be a really great story where they would just be like, no way, he threw you out. And I was like, yeah, he threw him out. But it just kept getting, I don't know, it kept continuing. And that's a really funny story. Actually, Marshall Loeb is, he passed away a couple of years ago, but his son, Michael Loeb, who I talk about in the book too, I sent him a copy of the book and I said, Michael, I know your father passed away a couple of years ago, but I just wanted you to see this book. You know this story, but I just, wanted you to have it. And he called me and said, I want you to know that my dad did write you that letter. And he said he cared so much about college students and writing to him. And he 100% sent you that letter. And it was funny because there's somebody who's really been, Marshall was just an icon, and there's somebody at I think SUNY University who's been studying Marshall Loeb and some of his historical, and he was copied on this, and he said this is exactly his patterns. So you're not the only one that he did this with. And I was like, oh, that's so funny. So anyway, I love it. The editor now of Fortune actually did a whole excerpt on this because he just thought it was so funny. And I just said, I don't know if it was funny to me at the time, but I never got a job at Fortune, but I always tell anyone who's interested this story. So it's pretty funny.
It's such a good story. I'm going to link it in the show notes as well for people to read. And it's my personal favorite chapter in the book. But I got to talk about this. A lot of people view entrepreneurs and they hear entrepreneurs talk about being risk takers and being so fearless. And one of the things that I love about you that sets you apart, but also makes you truly interesting, especially to other women, is that you are somebody who talks openly about doubts and fears. So why do you think that that's important to do?
I think that the thing that not a lot of people feel okay doing is, and call it, I think so many people today almost call it mental health, right? And I think sometimes those aren't the same things, right? But I think so often I've just always felt that I wanted to talk about these things, and whether it's in relationships, whether that's with your spouse or your, girlfriend, boyfriend, or your kids, or that you just feel so much better just by getting it off your chest. And so for some reason, that whole conversation seems to get checked as you move up the ladder. And I think it's particularly true, as you and I were touching on a little bit, I think it's particularly true for people that we see in C-suite positions now, Gen Xers like myself, that people are not really being as transparent about how hard it is. And in existing CEOs, so often we've heard the stories about leaders once they left. But I think that and it typically is a story of, yeah, it wasn't going so well, I couldn't talk about it then, and so then I opted out. And I often have thought about those stories and thought, if you actually talked about it, not went to the press about it, but actually talked about it internally, would it have been a different situation? I don't know, right? I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like we need to start having these conversations also, so that the next generation And the generation, I have 4 Gen Zers at home, and I want the world to be better for them. We are living in a world now where we're telling Gen Zers to be transparent, be who you are, and yet they're walking into a workforce which I guess is often not as transparent, and particularly for female leaders. And I think that it's my job, right, to be able to continue this conversation and get more people talking about it. Again, different than complaining, different than sort of saying this didn't go right and that's why I opted out. I think that's part of it. But when you're in the fight, when you're in the softball game, owning the fact like this isn't going so well. I want to be here. I want to have this conversation. I might not be the best at this, or what? How do we fix it? And I think that is, and some you're going to win, and some you're going to lose, and really sticking to your grounds, I think, is also part of that conversation too. And I think that more and more we need to just be having that conversation.
Amen to that. I really do appreciate you because of the topics you bring up, the way you bring them up, and how you live the way that you preach. I mean, the stories about you in this book, and just even speaking to you now, you truly are the real deal. You're authentic about it. And you're so inspirational for women at any point in their life who want to show up for themselves, but might have that doubt or are dealing with a lot of doubters. And I want to end this interview like we end them all. So I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger. So
I will support.
I love that. I am snapping my fingers, Kara. Thank you so much for being on our show today. Hey, you. Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives, for a good reason, to make it count. Until next week, all my love, Jen Glantz.